Throughout the 2024 campaign, and since he's become president, uh, he has talked about putting up tariffs. He's talked about trade policy that involves tariffs in his early, like, executive orders on trade policy. He called on the U.S. Trade Representative's office to investigate countries around the world to impose tariffs on them. He told Congress earlier this week that tariffs were going to make America rich again. He also told Congress that tariffs are about protecting American jobs. And not only that, they're about protecting the soul of the country. But he admitted that they're going to cause a disturbance.
The president has done a bit of a U-turn on those tariffs originally imposed on Canada and Mexico. The American president stated that for at least 4 weeks, most goods imported from Mexico and some from Canada are going to be exempt from his trade tariff regime. Now, the announcement comes just 24 hours after Trump waived tariffs against car makers following pleas from motor industry bosses, because of course it was hugely going to affect them. So what does this all mean? Joining us now is Graham Lanktree, who's senior trade reporter at POLITICO. Graham, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So why has Trump changed his mind? Is it just because his own car industry had a big go at him about it?
I mean, that's probably one reason. I mean, the president announced yesterday evening that he's going to delay these 25% tariffs on a significant portion of Mexican and Canadian goods until early April, so for about a month. That's after he imposed the tariffs roughly like Tuesday morning here in the UK. So they were just in place for a few days, and markets kind of reacted quite wildly to those being in place. The administration also increased tariffs on China by 10%. So now they're at 20%. Those remain in place. But White House officials yesterday, they told reporters that the carve-out applies to autos and all other goods that are covered by the current trade agreement that the U.S. has with Canada and Mexico. So that's quite a lot. It's not just autos, it's a wider number of goods as well. And this basically comes after he made commitments repeatedly that he was going to have sweeping tariffs in place, and they were going to be enforced without exemptions, without further delays. And the climb downs had a huge impact on markets. They've been up and down all week. The FTSE and 100s also reacted negatively to this as well. And businesses, investors around the world, they're unnerved by the uncertainty and the direction of the president's trade policies.
So what can we read into this? Does this make us think that actually Trump will listen to the markets and he will listen to industries from leaders from his own country's industries?
That's the multiple billion-dollar question. I think throughout the 2024 campaign, and since he's become president, he has talked about putting up tariffs. He's talked about trade policy that involves tariffs in his early, executive orders on trade policy. He called on the U.S. Trade Representative's office to investigate countries around the world to impose tariffs on them. He told Congress earlier this week that tariffs were going to make America rich again. He also told Congress that tariffs are about protecting American jobs. And not only that, they're about protecting the soul of the country. But he admitted that they're going to cause a disturbance. If he insists on imposing tariffs, I mean, this is going to lead to price rises, inflation for consumers in the US, Canada, Mexico, other countries. Canada is currently leaving its retaliatory tariffs in place, the initial ones that it imposed on the US in response. It's paused a second round. And the country's premiers of all of its different provinces, they're leaving some of their measures in place as well. And the premier of Ontario, he might levy a surcharge of 25% on energy that goes to the U.S. on Monday.
So, I mean, it's so interesting, as you say, because, the tariff was such an important part of the election campaign. It's a really big part of Donald Trump's brand, even though, lots of people argue. I mean, I was just looking back at, some old Ronald Reagan footage where he was basically saying that protectionism ultimately always harms prosperity. It was such a big thing for Trump. Do you think, if he is maybe reluctantly going to take a slightly more pragmatic approach to tariffs, do you think that means that the EU could be spared tariffs, or that the UK could be spared tariffs?
It's possible. I mean, that's the kind of like the basic kind of thing that kind of looms over all of this is the uncertainty. We've seen this past week tariffs put on, taken off. There's been, just a month ago, Trump said he was going to put tariffs on Canada and Mexico. Didn't do it because he apparently struck like a last minute deal, claiming that they were doing more about fentanyl on the border, which and immigration migrants, which he's claimed is, the kind of reason that this is happening. But he's also stated that it's to like, punish Canada as well, which he said he wants to make the 51st state of the United
Oh,
States.
yes, of course. One forgets about that. And just last question to you, Graham. China. I mean, China has had some very tough words, saying that, they're prepared to fight fire with fire. They're prepared to, go to war in terms of these trade tariffs. I mean, how ugly do you think it's going to get in terms of the trade war with China?
I mean, right now the tariffs on China are 20%. I think within the next week. I mean, the president said that he's going to levy more tariffs. There's another round that's expected on steel and aluminum imports from around the world that's coming on next Wednesday, supposedly. Then there's reciprocal tariffs, which means that he's going to, raise U.S. tariffs to whatever the other country has. But he's also said he's going to go after like taxes, like value added tax, VAT as well. I mean, Chancellor Rachel Reeves and the Bank of England Governor Andrew Bailey, they said this week that this broader trade war, even if the UK is able to get some kind of carve out from the US, that it's going to impact the global economy and therefore impact Britain's economy. So that means, lower trade flows. It means lower GDP, lower growth. So that's what some of the fallout could mean for the UK.
Yeah. As you say, it's just so difficult, isn't it? It's just the unpredictability, which is very difficult for everybody to navigate. But a really interesting conversation. Thanks for your time. That's Graham Lanktree from Politico there, talking to us about trade tariffs. And just to recap on that, Trump's done a bit of a U-turn on those tariffs originally imposed on Canada and Mexico.